And now, turning to our program, please welcome Barbara Velez, Principal of Velez and Associates, who will introduce our speaker.
I'm doing this because I obviously love food. I imagine there are very few in this room who have not at one time or another dined at one of the fabulous Bartolotta restaurants we are lucky to have in the southeastern Wisconsin. I know many of us have enjoyed the picnic fair at our annual Live at the Lakefront. A two-time winner and six-time James Beard Award nominee, Chef Paul Bartolotta is the co-founder and owner of the Bartolotta Restaurants. An internationally celebrated chef and restaurateur, Chef Bartolotta has brought his culinary talent and vision to kitchens all over the world, from Italy to Paris, from Paris to New York, from New York to Las Vegas, and back home in Milwaukee. With an education that started right here as he graduated from the restaurant and hotel management program at MATC in 1980, yes and yes, and continued in New York under the watchful eye of Tony May, the owner of the Rainbow Room. Chef Bartolotta has worked and learned in Italy, in Sicily, and France. At age 24, he opened his first restaurant in New York City and earned 3 stars from the New York Times. Chef Bartolotta brings culinary skills steeped in tradition and authenticity. His passion for creating authentic experiences continues to inspire the growth of the company that he and his late brother Joe launched in 1993. Their achievements together earned them national recognition with a nomination again by James Beard Foundation for Outstanding Restaurateur USA 3 years in a row, 2017, 2018, and 2019. Paul was honored as a finalist for Outstanding Restaurateur in 2020. This celebrated chef and businessman is a world-renowned television personality as well, with appearances on Italian, French, and Japanese television. In the US, he has appeared on Top Chef, Iron Chef, The Today Show, The Talk, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and Jimmy Kimmel Live. His wife, Robbie, primarily cooks at home. She is also a Culinary Institute of America graduate, and Paul credits Robbie with earning 4 stars when she helped open Ristorante Bartolotta in 1993. This has legs on it, and it moves. He loves antiques and appreciates the juxtaposition between antique Italian furniture and very modern designed Italian furniture. He loves all things silver, sterling, as well as the old Sheffield, when silver plating was in its infancy. A fan of his own restaurants, of course, but he also feels every Milwaukeean should taste the home-cooked, authentic fare of Three Brothers in Bayview, known for its Serbian delights. When Paul cooks at home, his go-to dish is spaghetti grassi alla pomodoro. What is that, you ask? Spaghetti alla pomodoro is, at its heart, the beautiful and pure expression of Italian cooking. A simple pasta dish featuring a sauce made from fresh tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, and basil. To Chef Bartolotta, it's never just food. It's a testament to the idea that the best meals often come from those made with the fewest, highest quality ingredients and created with love. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you Chef Paul Bartolotta.
Hello. I can't stand in one spot. I'm a chef. I got to move. So I asked them if they would give me a mic. So, Paul Bartolotta, I'm sure, how many of you guys knew my brother Joe? Well, we miss him every day. And so our story sort of starts in Wauwatosa. Joe and I, Maria, Felicia, grew up in Tosa, and we had all of our important lessons were taught around the table. We, as kids, every good news that we learned and every bad news that we heard, we experienced sitting at the Bartolotta table. And after my parents passed, Joe and I had the table refurbished a little bit, and now it sits in my office. And we spent some time after Joe's passing talking about what the future could be and how we wanted to build upon his legacy. And so a little bit of background, she gave you a lot of detail, but I would love to just expand a bit, if I may. So growing up in Wauwatosa, didn't have a lot of money, so my first job was as a dishwasher at Balustrades on 68th Street. I don't know if you know it. And I very quickly found the love of the kitchen, but I also went from being a dishwasher to a prep cook to being a pizza cook. And I just, in a short period of time, I was 14 years old. I'd sort of outgrown the paper routes and the mowing lawns and shoveling snow. And this was my first job, and I just loved the environment. And when I was in high school, in junior high school, just talking about what I was going to do, after high school, I just loved the restaurant business. And so for me, it was a natural to stay doing something that I loved. And I remember going to my counselor and the counselor telling my father in one of our meetings, they said, we think your son has a learning disability. We think his grades are asymmetrical. He's an A student in some things, and he's a D- generous in other things. And my father sort of started laughing, and the teachers, the counselor said, "Why are you laughing?" And he said, "Well, it's easy. You're blowing the shit out of my son." And it really told me that my father knew who I was. And when I had to sort of decide what I was going to do with my career, and started talking about going to college, my dad said, "You have to do what you like." And at the time, I went from working there to working at the Chancery in Wauwatosa, right across the street from Restaurante, working for Joe DeRosa. And again, I had this opportunity to follow my dream. And so my dad said to me at that moment, he said, "Son, you have to do what you're passionate about and what you think you're going to be good at. And you seem to like working in restaurants, why don't you consider that?" And so I said, "Yeah, let me take a deeper dive into this. I will." And I saw an ad in the paper, and it said working apprenticeship with a master continental chef. And it was John Marangelli. Do any of you guys remember John Marangelli, the chef? It was a while ago. And I went to work with Marangelli, and he taught me so many different things in the restaurant business, mostly about flavor, but also about work ethic. And while all my friends were out in high school, going to parties, I was working in the kitchen. But I found myself again in love with what I was doing. And I went to visit my sister in New York, and she was working at the Rainbow Room at the time. And this restaurateur said, "I hear that your sister's telling me you want to be a chef." And I said, "I do." And he said, "Well, write me a letter and prove to me that you're serious. Do you speak Italian?" I said, "No." "Have you saved any money?" I said, "No." "Do you have any money?" I said, "No." "Do your parents have any money?" I'm like, "Less." So he said, "Okay." He said, "Well, save as much money as you can and learn to speak Italian and write me this letter." And I did. And 6 months go by, and he said, I get a call in the middle of the restaurant at Marangelli's saying, Tony May picks up the phone. He says, yes, it's Tony May, and I'd like you to come to New York this weekend. You'll be here the weekend with me. You'll fly to Italy on Tuesday. You start your job in Italy on Wednesday. And of course, he said, have you saved any money? And I was like, not really. And he's like, have you taken the Italian classes? He's like, not so much. And he said, okay, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it when you get here. So I got to New York. But before I did, I had a family dinner, and all my family members put money in the center of the table for me to, I cooked a dinner, and it was like a charity little tin basket went around, and everybody put like little checks and some money. And I remember leaving to Italy with a little bit of money, and I went to see Tony May in New York, and I started my next job in Italy. I was supposed to be in Italy for 6 months, and then I've been staying 6.5 years in Italy. I worked in 15 restaurants from Sicily down in the southern, all the way up into the Alps. And when I was about 23 years old, I was the chef de cuisine of a 2-star Michelin restaurant in central Italy. And from there, these owners of the restaurant sent me to work in France. And I had the opportunity to work in 4 3-star Michelin restaurants, Verger, Trois Gros, Bocuse, Taïwan. And I did my pastry school at Gaston Lenôtre in Paris. So my training was formative. And I lived this sort of life where I was so disconnected with my family. And I grew up in this family where everything was about family, very, very tight family. And all those lessons that I talk about at the table now, as we rethought our company values, we added an element of it that we didn't have before, which was our sort of our purpose statement. So we had a vision statement, which was, how do we bringing the Bartolotta table to the world? And that means by anything we do, wherever we do it, however we do it, with a certain standard. Our mission has always been about building relationships and creating memories for people. And then lastly, probably the most important thing that we've added is, what is our purpose? Why are we really here? And it's all about community. It's about elevating the social fabric of our community. So when Joe and I were sort of discussing our values, we created what we call the Bartolotta Promise, which is our commitment, everything built around the word care. Again, all the values we garnered from our parents. And metaphorically, the Bartolotta table is that family table where the good and the bad news is always shared. Our home was filled with, back in Milwaukee, back in Wauwatosa, was filled with people that had trouble in their lives. And my father was a man who always said, if anybody needs something, our door was always open. In the Bartolotta family on 71st Street, the kitchen was open, the door was open, and even though there were times when my parents both weren't working, there were times where the entire neighborhood was always at our table. And whenever people were having difficulty in their family lives, whether it was a divorce or a friend of my father's or my mother's that had cancer, they would come and live with us, not for like a week. It'd be like months, 6 months, a year, like you're on the couch. We grew up by caring for other people. That's everything that is in the DNA of who we are as a family. And even when we had less, that was not ever a question. The door was always open in our home, and that, I think, has actually been foundational, how we are as people and how we try to care for people when we do it in our restaurants. So as we renamed it a little bit, bringing the Bartolotta table to the world, it was really about, how do we care for people? And we care first for our team. Somebody asked me earlier, what's the biggest challenge in the industry right now in staffing, right? But it all boils down to, you can't force someone to want to believe in what you do. You can only believe it and live it every day, and then hope that they drink that Kool-Aid and they believe in it as much as it, because there's always somebody that's going to offer another job or another position or an extra $1 or $2 an hour in our industry. But it's about really caring for those people and investing the time in mentoring people, giving them opportunities for growth, having progression for these people, having a career planning for these people, and then taking care of the guest. How do we take care of the guests? Well, if you have good employees and you have happy employees, then they're going to take care of the guests because they're going to see that if we're caring for them, they will then in turn care for the guest. And then our community, we view our relationships as so incredibly important. We have been blessed to have a public-private relationship with the county park system at Lake Park Bistro, which, by the way, here's a little business plug. Lake Park Bistro will be 30 in a week, 30 years old, so we're super proud of that. And in addition to keep the relationship side of it, you know, how do we, as an organization, take care of each one of the relationships we have? And it's either with, whether it's with our bank, or whether it's with our landlord, or whether it's with our vendors. We talk about calling a vendor not when the bread isn't great, calling the vendor when the bread is perfect, so that when they get the call and not the, oh, you know, the bread isn't as good today, or my scallops weren't the right size or something. No, we actually work the other way around. We call them, especially when things are excellent, because we want to set the standard for what excellence looks like. And when they are picking the bread the next time and you called them and said, hey, the crust today was amazing, it was so beautiful, the guy who's going to pick the bread next week or the next day to come to our restaurant, he's already prideful of the fact that we acknowledge he's going to pick the best loaves for us. So everything that we have sort of invested our time and our energy is about caring for others, caring for the relationships, and for example, supporting the mission of Discovery World, where we do the food service at Discovery World. And it's so important because we're doing something for that community, for our community, and for the kids that go through that museum. And it's a beacon of our lakefront. And then, of course, we have to be responsible people to take care of the bottom line. We have to be good business people. And I'm going to tell you a couple of little stories of the wisdom I learned from my father. So when I was working in Chicago at Spiaggia, they had recruited me from San Domenico, New York. And for me, I'd been in Italy all those years. I'd been in France. I was in New York for almost 5 years. So I'd been away from my family living. So getting closer to the Midwest was really important to me to be back here. So I found this position at Wood Levy. It was a gigantic company. And they recruited me because they really wanted to elevate their food service. My job was to bring the experience of Europe and elevate their food service. And about 6 months into the process, I'm terribly frustrated. And I would be driving up here on my days off, and I'd be seeing my dad, my mom, and I started, I was still pretty young, and I was, complaining like a young, employee does. And I said to my dad, I said, these people, they don't get it. And my dad's like, what do you mean? He goes, I mean, like there's a guy in a lab coat with a clipboard, checking who's chopping the parsley. And he goes, they brought me here to elevate this food. I mean, I can't stay there. They don't get it. My dad starts laughing. And I said, why is it you think this is funny? And Judy, my dad, is like, my son, the artist. And I said, Dad, I'm not an artist. He goes, no. Son, pay attention. So we're sitting at that famous Bartolotta table, and I'm getting the wisdom of my dad. And he said to me, the Levy brothers are in the business of making money. They run a great company. They make a lot of money. They hired you because you have an expertise that they don't have, and they can afford to hire you. He said, they're interested in making money, and they want you to deliver on what is their priority first. And he said, you're an artist, so you're worrying about the next sauce or the next dish you're going to make on the menu. And it was at that moment I had this epiphany where my dad said to me this quote that I repeat a lot. And he said to me, son, true artistic freedom is first born out of economic freedom. We would not have the Sistine Chapel if it were not for the Pope. We would not have had the Renaissance if it were not for the Medicis. And all the way down through history, all the great things that happen in communities happen because people who have the means give back and sponsor and do good with what they have earned. But the message to him was that you need to become a business person. So I spent about a year really focusing my energy on becoming a business person. And after that year, they actually made me a partner. This was 1992. A year later, my brother moved back from New York, and he had his first baby on the way, and he was working at the Anchorage restaurant up on Port Washington Road, and he was making a decent salary, but not a great salary. And he just said, he called me up and he said, listen, you know, I moved to New York, and when I was in Italy, I would write letters to my brother saying, you know, we have to do something together. You do the front, I'll do the back. You do the front, I'll do the back. And I would write these letters, and finally I convinced him to go into the restaurant business. So he went to MATC after I did, which, by the way, no disrespect, but I actually didn't officially graduate. I dropped out a little early from MATC. I saw everybody cheering over at MATC. Okay, so I did drop out early because I had this opportunity to go to Italy, but they gave me an honorary degree, so technically I am a graduate. I did make it, but I didn't want to like put out the false pretense that I actually got the diploma that I earned, but they did say I deserved it, so thank you. But then Joe enrolled in MATC, and then he moved to New York, and he worked around in New York. And then when he came back, I was back in Chicago, and he said, I can't make enough money. I need to open a restaurant. Will you help me? And I said, sure. I said, tell me what you need. And he's like, well, I'm going to go find a space. And interestingly enough, he found the space right across the street from the Chancery, where I had worked. Joe DeRosa had become a family friend. I don't know if any of you know Joe DeRosa. One person. Make sure when you see him, I love that guy. And so Joe had followed our career, or my career and my brother's, and we were sitting at the Bartolotta table, and we had found this location. I drove up from Chicago, we looked at it, and they said at that moment, my mom and dad were sitting there, and my dad said, well, have you told Joe DeRosa you're going to open across the street? And I was like, Dad, the Chancery is like pub burgers and stuff like that, so we're doing something a little bit more sophisticated. And he's like, son, it's out of respect. He gave you one of your first jobs. He followed your career. He's been a supporter, and he's a family friend. You do the right thing. So the next day, Joe and I had a breakfast meeting with Joe DeRosa in his office right above the Chancery. And Joe DeRosa said, well, have you gotten your money together? And Joe and I had like 50 grand. And he's like, okay, what do you think you're going to need to do this? And we said, well, I think about like 150. And he starts laughing. He's like, yeah, it's going to be well over 200. And he goes, how much have you raised? And I'm like, well, not very much. And he's like, okay, I'll give you the money. And he made sure, giving us probably 60%, 70%, my mental math is not great, but the majority of the money came from Joe DeRosa, and he made sure that Joe and I owned 51% of the business. Now, I don't know who does that, but Joe DeRosa did that. And had it not been for that and so many people, we all know that none of us have achieved anything on our own. And without Joe DeRosa, without Mike Cudahy, without so many people over the years that have helped us, we wouldn't be standing here. Without Park Bank in the very beginning that believed us and helped us do an SBA loan to do Lake Park Bistro, it would have never happened. And so Joe helped us do this, and within a year and a half, he sat us down and said, you guys are doing great. I'm really happy for you. Buy me out. I want you guys to own 100% of it. And that was our moment just before we found a location to do Lake Park Bistro, which will be 30. So Ristorante is 32 years old, and Lake Park Bistro will be 30 on the 28th of September. And so Joe called me up one day and said, hey, listen, you know, this restaurant's too small. I mean, I built myself a job, not a business. And I said, okay, what do we do? And he said, we got to find another location. I said, okay, then go find one and call me when you have it. A few weeks later, he calls me up, tells me, listen, I got this place. When are you going to be in Milwaukee? I'm like, tomorrow. He's like, perfect. Meet me at this address. So it was a Sunday morning. Showed up at Lake Park, peering in the windows of the Lake Park Pavilion. The next morning, we had an appointment to tour it. The city was out, the county was out looking for a request for people to come up with proposals for it. We wrote a very thorough proposal. But before we did it, I said to Joe, I said, listen, I think this feels more like a French restaurant to me. And I'll never forget, Joe looked at me, he goes, Paul, we're Italian. We can't do French. And I said, I know, Joe, but I worked in France. I think we can do something, rustic French food, rustic Italian food. Now, I would love to say that we were so great that we did a demographic study on the median income and the amount of cars that drove by Lake Park every day. Forget it. We were two kids peering in through the glass. And to give you an idea, when we opened Ristorante, it was about a $200,000 investment. And 2 years later, we had spent about $1.2 million doing Lake Park. And we were out of money, like donut, no mas dinero in the bank. And about a week before we were going to open, we were living on a thread. And I asked the architect, I said, what are we doing for decor? We have art coming in. He goes, Paul, you guys are so over budget here. He goes, I didn't plan for it. You got to figure it out. So Joe and I ran to a couple of bookstores. We bought a bunch of books on French posters and French artwork. We took a razor knife and we cut them all out. And then we went and bought every used frame that we could find. And of course, Joe was putting up the pictures on the wall with a screwdriver. And of course, he didn't even bother using a level, so there's some that are crooked. And halfway through it, he says, do you think anybody's going to look at this art? He's up on the ladder. I'm like, Joe, you need some artwork in the place. Just finish putting up the art. He's like, oh, do you think anybody's ever going to look at these? I'm like, I don't know, Joe, but you can't have a blank wall. So, of course, in my brother's classic Joe fashion, he takes one of the posters and he turns it upside down. And he screws it in to see if anyone will notice. So on your next visit, if you go to Lake Park Bistro, go find the poster. I'll give you a hint. It's that same poster that was screwed in by Joe. We've painted around that one. It has never been taken down in all the years that we've repainted. And it is in one of the Lakeview rooms. So when you're there, please look around for the Joe, because every time I go there, I touch it. And we do miss him a lot. Yeah. So my job now is to everything we do for the future. We don't live in the present, we live in the future. We build for the future. Everything that I work on every day with our team is about investing in them. I don't know, is Keith in the room? Did he make it? Something in the restaurant business happened, who knows? But I work with Keith Trafton, who's the CEO of the company, and he's been with us for 14, 15 years. We have in our company now just under 1,000 employees, and in full season, 1,200. And when my brother passed, I was in Italy visiting my wife and daughter, and probably the most horrific day of my life for sure, because I had to tell all of our team that had happened, and I jumped on a plane to come back. And the day that I landed, something crazy happened. One of the first questions that people asked me, they said, well, we need to organize a celebration of life, and we need to go through all these other things that go through this transition. I'm like, okay. And there's like, but we need to know what you're going to call yourself. And I looked at the team, I was like, guys, who cares about like titles? I mean, my brother just passed, we have to organize. And they're like, no, Paul, your name. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, you are somebody that always calls yourself Bartolotta. And here everybody says Bartolotta. And I said, okay. And so there was this long discussion. And at one point, somebody walked up to me and said, put their hand out and said, hi, and I put my hand out and I said, I'm Paul Bartolotta, because when I got on a plane to leave in Italy, I was in Italy all those years, it was Bartolotta. I was in France all those years, it was Bartolotta. And then when I got to New York, I brought everybody from Italy to work in the restaurant, all the team, so everybody spoke Italian. And when I came to Chicago, I brought half of my staff as well, so everybody was speaking Italian. So I had to remember when I hit the Illinois border that I grew up as Bartolotta. And if you look at the spelling, you will notice that there is no A. It is Bartolotta. So they said, what's authentic to you, Paul? And I said, Bartolotta. But what I immediately realized was every time I would say that to people, my biggest challenge was everyone knew Joe and everybody loved Joe. So how do you fill those shoes? And that is almost impossible. So I focused my energy on finding a way to get to know as many people as I could, but he had a 25-year advantage on me, and all the years that I was involved in all of our restaurants, I was always, by design, staying a little bit in the back and kind of like promoting my chefs, because I felt while I was in Chicago and then in Las Vegas, it wasn't right for me to sort of take the credit for what our chefs were doing in our restaurants. And if we want to create people who are invested in what we're doing, you can see we have our chefs' pictures up, because we believe that they are the soul of our company. Our chefs, our restaurant people, our managers, our leadership team, we're in the people business. We're not in the restaurant business. We are in the people business. Everything we do is about team, and everything that we do for a motive, for the right reasons. And so I spent a fair amount of time in the very beginning, and I realized that people were not really responding to Bartolotta very well. So I now introduce myself as Paul Bartolotta or Paul Bartolotta, whichever you prefer, because it's very natural for me to say Bartolotta Restaurants, Bartolotta's Lake Park Bistro. I could never actually say Ristorante Bartolotta, that I couldn't do, but Ristorante Bartolotta I could do. That was an easy one. But in all of our restaurants, each one of the restaurants, to my brother's credit, he found incredible locations. From Lake Park Bistro, thanks to Mike Cudahy, Joe and I could have never done Harbor House had it not been for Mike Cudahy's support and financial backing. I know that Joe Brennan is in the room. Without him, we would have never had this opportunity as well at Discovery World to be part of that museum and all that has become, and is the development and watching that grow. And we've tried to give back every way in which we can. One of our biggest challenges, obviously, no one really wants to talk about COVID anymore because we're so done with it. But I will tell you, COVID for the restaurant business, there's another gentleman here who is intimate with this reality from the Wisconsin Club. COVID is not over for the restaurant business. The biggest challenge that occurred was when we closed all the restaurants, and we actually closed them before the state closed. We were the first to close all of our restaurants, and everybody thought I was crazy. But I was on the phone on a regular basis with my friends in Italy, and my friends specifically in Bergamo, which was one of the biggest cities that was decimated with COVID. And they were outside with their phones, say, "Paul, what do you hear?" And I heard nothing but sirens. And he was telling me these horror stories about what was going on in there are parts of Italy that are pretty underdeveloped. Northern Italy, Bergamo, Milano, not at all. And he was telling me, "Paul, it's a disaster." So we closed all of our restaurants, predominantly because if we're going to put our employees first, we put our bottom line and everything else second. And so we closed the restaurants because we were terribly concerned of so much we didn't know about the health and safety of our employees. We also had a mask policy for our employees and our guests. That was unpopular. I know that. I heard it from everybody. That said, we did it for the reasons that we thought were right, which were we wanted to take care of our people. And we didn't feel that if the guest was going to breathe on our employees, that was a good thing, any more than we wanted our guests to have an employee show up without a mask to serve the food at a moment when we were so hypersensitive that I actually work with the Medical College of Wisconsin to make sure that our protocols were at the highest possible levels. And I will tell you, we've weathered that. We went through, obviously, probably the darkest moment was after about 4 weeks of paying all our salaried employees that we had laid everybody off. We sat them down and we said, we have to lay everybody off. And so laying off 950 employees and going down to 12, and the 12 apostles, I call them, at half salary for the better part of 6-7 months was not only a leap of faith by those people, but testament to the city of Milwaukee, because during that time, Milwaukeeans showed up for us. They bought gift certificates. When we started reopening, they flooded the restaurants. They were telling us, you have to survive. You're business people, so cash, we have this cash cycle in the restaurant business. January, February, and March. December, you're at your highest. You sell gift cards. It's December, and then January, February, and March, slow. The lowest point was right around when COVID hit, and I had purchased the company on the February 24th, and on, was it March 9th, March 10th, I think it closed everything. And it was a very limited moment, so we called all of our vendors at that time, and we said, listen, we have more than $3 million of outstanding payables, and we just don't have the liquidity to make good on this. So we were upfront with them, and we said, here's what we propose. We'll pay you 10% for the next 10 months, and we'll stay current on every new dollar, and we're not in a position to pay interest on that money. And every one of our vendors, from Maki Produce to Cisco, they all said, you have to get through this, so we're gonna support you. What do you need? We talked to our landlords, and they were there for us. Not everyone could be, but we will do what we can. Some tacked it on to the extension on lease, some gave us discount, but we asked what we could, and we were very clear by saying, if you're not in a position to help us, we will honor our commitment. We didn't miss a payment on any one of our payments, on any one of our leases, and we were literally at the very, very bottom. And now we're in this rebuilding phase, and we've spent the last 4 or 5 years really, truly rebuilding our restaurants from the bottom up, because when you lay somebody off and you can't hire them for 6 months, they're gonna go find another job. They have to take care of their own. Conversely, because we took some of the government loans, those were individual LLC specific, so when we took those, each one of them had to be, there was no Papa Bear restaurant group anymore that could shuttle money around. If Joe and I were opening a new restaurant and it wasn't cash flowing really well in the very beginning, which is not uncommon, it takes a little bit of love and support to kind of get it off that first year or so, year and a half. There was none of that post-COVID. If you took any government money and it was tied to that LLC, you all know, it stays right there. And so when we opened each restaurant, we had to make sure that it was in the black before we could move on to the next one, because we couldn't have any of them in the red, because there was no there as the backup like you might have had if things were normal. So it was an incredibly challenging time for the business, but it was incredibly challenging because our most valuable asset has been, is today, and will always be our people. And so not being able to take care of all of them was super hard, and then earning all those people back and letting them know that we did absolutely the best we could without obviously divulging everything that was going on in our realities, to make sure that they understood what our values were and who we were and what we were doing. I could sit up here and talk about ravioli and foie gras and mousses, but I think to the business community, I think it's more to talk about the realities of the business that we run and what are the core values by which we run them. And these are sort of who we are as an organization and what was most important. And my job now is to build on the legacy of my brother and also prepare our team, my brother's daughters, my nieces, and some family members in work within our business to grow into the role for the next generation of the Bartolotta Restaurants. So I hope I didn't bore you with all of that. And I guess we're going to do questions.
Yes, thank you so much. We have time for 1 or 2 questions, so if you have a question, please step up to the microphone and introduce yourself.
I like tough questions.
Hi, Chef. Thank you so much, Marilka Velez. We are blessed with such a dynamic restaurant scene here in the city of Milwaukee, but I think your brand promise has always been evident because when I have friends from out of town or I want to create a special memory, I know I can count on the Bartolotta family.
Bartolotta's fine, all good. I do both, I plan both camps.
My question here is that a lot of those great concepts come and go, so I'd be curious if you'd be willing to share any of your insights on how you approach innovation and new concepts in your business.
Excellent question. So how do we approach new business? So we're currently in the process of reconcepting Rumpus Room. I would love to say everything we've ever done was a home run. It has not been. And so along the way, we've had some successes and we've taken our lumps. We opened Ristorante, Pizzeria Piccola, and Ristorante Bartolotta on Downer. Not so much. We've had other locations that haven't done so well. We opened up Nona's in Brookfield, and we converted it to Mr. B's Steakhouse. So, not great rocket science. You either fix it, you pivot, or you shutter it. So in this case, we have like 2 locations since COVID that we've not reopened yet. Pizzeria Piccola, which we're using more as a private dining space. And we redid the terrace to make it more exciting at La Terrazza at Ristorante, and it's been wildly successful. So we're very happy with that. We have always felt that we needed to lead the market as best we could. And again, to my brother's credit, he saw that there is a more well-traveled, more educated consumer in Milwaukee than actually when Joe said to me, I want to open a restaurant in Milwaukee. I said, are you nuts? And he's like, no, we can do it. There's a demand for this in Milwaukee. I'm like, bro, if there was a demand, it would have been done. I mean, most of the restaurants that are there had already gotten to that peak moment and hadn't been able to stay or hadn't reinvented themselves. So I respectfully talk about places like Car Watches or Mater's that still does very well, but the English Room at the Pfister and all these restaurants that have kind of come and gone over the years, those were incredible restaurants. I grew up eating at Stouffer's and Beyond the Sea and many of these restaurants that maybe you guys remember back in the day, but there was that gap in like the 70s and the 80s. There just wasn't a lot of new restaurants coming around. There's a lot of ones being legacy. Our greatest fear today, and one of the things I'm most encouraged about, is how it has changed now and how we're actually generationally getting a younger consumer. That's a good thing, I think, for us. So we look at concept development in terms of what can we offer that connects the dots between the emotional experience, the food experience, the hospitality experience, lighting, sound, all these elements go into the design of a restaurant. But it has to be something that we believe, that we understand that there's a demand for, or that in the early days, we weren't even smart enough to have this conversation. We just felt like, oh, we're gonna do Italian and then we're gonna do French. And thank God for all of you, you embraced us and you supported us, because if it weren't for the city of Milwaukee who embraced us, it wouldn't have happened, right? So each concept that we do, we begin generally with a food concept. What do we think is the food concept that we could do in a specific location? Rumpus is one of the best concepts we ever did, but we learned very quickly an error. Where we did Rumpus, it wasn't Bartolotta enough. There was no tablecloth. It wasn't fancy enough for people getting dressed, going to the Rep or Marcus Center or a concert. And we weren't hip enough to get the young people that were going to come to that were going to be on Water Street, or the younger people that wanted the gastropub idea. So we have saved every element because it's one of the best design things my brother ever did. But it just was in a building and in a location that we felt was, we were trying to be everything to everybody, and we were nothing to both groups. We weren't enough hip to be hip and trendy. And wherever Joe and I have tried to go mid-market, we've had a hard time. And so things that we've learned over the years is when you play at the top of the market, or I would say most of our restaurants at the upper level of the market, there are other great restaurants, but ours are at the upper level. At that point, when the economy bounces, and over 30 years, we've seen the economy bounce a number of times, 9/11, 08, 09. So we've seen these moments where the economy has really taken a hit. We've felt it, but we felt it less because people like yourselves are people who maybe you're going to watch what you're going to do a little bit, but you're still going to go out for an anniversary dinner, a special dinner. So those things are going to happen. But everybody in that mid-market, when that market gets choppy, people trade down very, very quickly. What we've seen happen now, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. What we've seen happen now is that we need to be reinvesting in our restaurants and giving more because there's been such an inflationary moment for all of our businesses, but certainly in hospitality. Cost of labor, cost of operating, cost of food has gone through the roof. So how do you make money? With compressed margin, you've got to drive more revenue, you've got to drive more volume. So how do you do that? And our greatest challenge in the industry, and I think you're experiencing the same thing, is you've got to grow the business by offering more than you did before. And all the restaurants that were very inexpensive have been forced to raise their prices, but if they have cement floors and the wood tables that are kind of sticky and the roll-up table, napkin that's in a roll-up that's not even cotton, but it's synthetic, and you're eating there and you're looking at the prices and you're saying, wow, this is almost like eating at a Bartolotta restaurant. And what do I get? I don't have servers in uniforms. I don't have the expanded wine list. I don't have like fine dining table linens. I don't have. So we have invested and believe in the high end of the market, and our concepts are built around starting with food and then making sure you create a complete package. Can I finish with one last thing? I just want at the end just to say this, that I want to, first of all, thank you for inviting me here. I hope that this was of some value. But most importantly, I came because I want to say thank you to all of you for having supported our family businesses, our employees, and we will continue to do our best to be part of the social fabric of our community and give back as best we can. But we really appreciate 32 years of your having our back. So thank you, Milwaukee. Thank you all.